you gonna get free this time? Falling into a blue sky mind. Came to me in that song, my friend.
Welcome back to You, Me, and the Elephant with Deb Air. And
Crystal clear, baby.
so we're just going to start just to create some space for everyone. Taking that inhale in your nose. Count of 4. Hold at the top for a count of 4. And slowly let that exhale out for a count of 4. Holding it at the bottom in stillness for a count of 4. Taking another breath in your nose. Holding it at the top, feeling that space between action and reaction, and letting it out. And holding. And just start to breathe naturally, however you want. Yeah, this is a good way to start for sure.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when you feel yourself with internal changes or growth, or you feel like you've gone through a breakthrough, let's say an experience of a breakthrough, either in your body, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually? What do you do when you have an experience like that, but you're not necessarily feel the receptivity of your environment? How do you integrate your breakthrough moments into your world? So whether that's your family life, your work life, your routine, sometimes it can feel different because you feel different. What do you do when you have breakthrough experiences for yourself, and how do you integrate into your regular world that has yet to experience that they didn't necessarily experience your breakthrough? So what do you do, Crystal? Have you ever had an experience where you feel you either went away to a seminar, or you had a moment, a retreat, when you had all these, you felt expanded, you felt excited, you felt connected to something bigger, and then you went back home into your regular routine? Has there ever been an experience for you? How do you navigate that when you have an experience, even though the people that you live with day to day have not?
So relevant. How does this happen? How do we find ourselves in these places where this question is exactly what is happening in my life right now? What I think is funny, it was like,
The
man, I
emoji
wish
that goes like, I don't know.
I don't know. What I think is funny, it was like, oh, why couldn't this have been like when I did come home from that retreat and I felt amazing, versus I feel like I've had one of these recently in my life, these aha, deeper dive, truth bearing, just shinings. The light hit this groove that said, light has not been here in so long. And all these places got illuminated, and I'm walking around with these brighter eyes. I feel like this new perspective and new neural pathways created in my brain, and everyone else is like still eating chips on the couch watching YouTube, wondering what the heck am I doing? Why
What
has mom
happened
been
to our
in
mother?
silence for one whole day? Why won't she stop walking around, piddling around with these things in deep thought? I feel what has been consistent is that it definitely takes time. It never feels like you went from one spot to the next. I'm so appreciative when I have these bigger ahas or these just stars that align, and there is space that's required. For me, I guess it feels like maybe an unraveling is happening, and that can feel disoriented, I think, because so many pieces are, I feel like maybe are even loosening or coming apart or peeling back. And that can not feel as comfortable as it was not knowing. And so giving myself that space and that time and that comfort, and I probably could use more rest in that time instead of trying to push through. And yeah, it's definitely a soul's journey, and not to judge those around us who like didn't go on the same space mission as you may have just done. I feel there's a quickness that happens to my return. I may go into outer space, have this big aha, and I come back down and I feel like I meant to share that with everyone who I feel needs to hear it. And they're looking at me like, I didn't tune into that channel.
I didn't watch that movie.
That's right. Exactly. So I'm definitely in it. So here we are. This is happening to me right now.
Well, how apropos that this has been the thing that's come up for us to chat about today.
Indeed.
You remind me of your share and just this theme in general. So Donnie Epstein, who is the founder of Network Spinal and Somato-Respiratory Integration, which are body technologies that I have utilized and I have worked with for many years, he used to introduce these events, these retreats called transformational gates. And he would talk about some of the changes and that you might be having all these ranges of experiences. And that once you're on the other side of that through the weekends, that you may go home and you may be wondering why everyone's acting so weird. And then eventually you realize, oh, it's not them that's different. It's me.
Mm.
And so I think this is a very valid thing from my experience in my own life, but certainly some really vivid experiences, one with my mom, but just really watching other people go to events like this, let's say, have big breakthrough moments and then come home and you're all jazzed up. And this can happen many different ways, right? You go and you do a race, you're very excited, but you're like, why do I not feel like I'm being supported in my regular life? And it's like you don't feel like you quite fit into the old life. You want to be there, but there's something that just feels like it can be a rough landing sometimes.
Mm.
And I've seen that in many different ways. And it's a very interesting thing because as I was listening to you, I'm just going to use one example and I'm going to use like something that we talk about often that I think feels important to bring forward. The example was that when I got divorced from my son's dad, he was pretty young. He was 3. And I remember my ex-husband was getting married to someone else. And I thought, you know what? I was going through all of this change. And it was very what we would call like a deep growing process for me, a lot of breakthroughs. So I was having these reflective experiences of, oh my God, I forgive him for the things, whatever the things I may have thought were. And oh, wow, I want to all co-parent and that's lovely. And I was having all of this shift in myself without the awareness. So kind of like you were saying, I just want to share it. I want to be like, so I remember the first time I met my ex-husband's girlfriend, I walked up the stairs and I gave her a big hug and I was like, this is great. And I was so kind. And I'm like, why is she like stiff as a board? Like, why is she acting really weird? And it's like, I came in like full force. It's almost, it's an interesting juxtaposition of having awarenesses within ourselves and breakthroughs that it's like you open the blinders inside, but sometimes there's a moment where you almost close the awareness of the external effect that you have. It's maybe, I don't want to say self-absorbed, but there can be a part that's like, wow, I'm having all of this awareness within myself of who I am and whatever it is for you in that moment. And so I'm just going to blurt it all out. And it was such a mismatch. Like for me to tell my ex-husband, I forgive you. He's like, for what? And it's like, oh, wait, that was maybe never even meant for him. And
Right.
or I wasn't reading the room because I was so enamored by the shifts that were changing within me, which brings me to the thing that I want to bring forward. That when you were sharing, it's like when we change
Mm.
in ourselves and we make a shift, a breakthrough, a transformational, whatever you want to call, we have some kind of thing that shifts within ourselves physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And we come back into our world in which we lived before that shift.
Mm-hmm.
We have changed the agreement.
Mm.
We have changed the agreement. And so there is some impetus upon ourselves. Like we all want to just be like, oh my God, I feel free. And don't get me wrong. I think that we really need to surround ourselves with people who celebrate us, who also value the same experiences of internal growth, external growth, of just really living in a way that feels vibrant and free and alive and connected. That being said, when we make these shifts and we come back and we just kind of want everybody to get it right away,
Mm-hmm.
um, we have changed the agreement because we have changed something within ourselves. And although I think that that is contagious, meaning that when we begin to resonate change,
Mm-hmm.
it resonates around us. But when that hits our world that's not used to it, they feel it.
That's right. That's right. That is a huge insight and health tip for me because that is exactly what I feel can ruffle the feathers in the room
Mm-hmm.
of the bird's nest, of my bird's nest here. Feathers are ruffled.
Sure. Yeah.
And no one quite gets why. And for myself, honestly, if I could go back and redo this weekend where I felt there was a lot of ahas and big information that kind of came my way. And I immediately tried to jump right back into doing everything the same way. So I was almost in denial that I had even shifted. I was trying to hold space for everyone else by showing up this same version of me, doing the things that I normally do. And it was such a mismatch. It was such a, I think, dishonoring to myself that I couldn't just give myself the permission to say, you know what? Just rest and do what you want to do. Change it up. You don't have to follow the plan, so to speak, or the structure that was in place just to say that the weekend was successful or you did the things. And that's a big
Yeah.
wake up call for me. And it probably feels super heavy for my family because I can't help but to be this energy that disperses back into the space with, let me see one open door that is going to give me some kind of leeway that says, oh, you're going to listen to what I'm going to say right now. Oh, you're interested. And I'm going to just download this massive amount of information on you. And they're all like, not so much. Just trying to enjoy my weekend. And I need to give myself that permission to download, that permission to just be with and bathe in, journal it out, talk it out, do whatever it is that you need to do to truly integrate this information for yourself and then go into the world.
So many things are popping for me. It's a very interesting thing because I think I've probably done ranges of this when there's such a big shift that happens in or awareness within myself. I think that it's a lifestyle. Like you said, it takes time. When we make a breakthrough, we make a breakthrough. It's kind of like you have a wedding and then you have your marriage. It's like you have the breakthrough, and that's the peak moment where the gap that we often talk about, there's more information that comes in where we all of a sudden have an upgrade experience of ourselves. That's the peak moment. It's an important moment, but then it's the living into the moment. And I think the reason why this came up to speak about in the first place is because this part is less spoken about, all the big, massive shifts that people make,
Mm-hmm.
which of course we want to celebrate. And how do you live into that? How does that integrate into your world? And I used to do this with seminars, and I would be so blown away and so expanded. And I would go back into my practice and be like, okay, now what do I do? And I would often be really slow. I'd be backed up because I'd be trying to integrate all this experience and change that I wanted to apply to
Mm-hmm.
my practice members in the practice. But it was just like, how do you integrate that in? When I started teaching the work, I remember telling people, because I had to learn to do this myself, was just take one new thing that you brought with this awareness and just do that for the week and see how that feels, because it can be overwhelming when the shutter of the cosmos opens wide enough and we see so much more than we had been living, and then we try to go into the world that we had been living, right? You talked about shrinking down or being the old self,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a painful thing because it's a deceitful thing to the truth that you just sort of are awakened to. So I think there's some pieces in the person, with the personhood of the person who is having the experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to recognize that this is not an uncommon thing, that when you have a big moment, that when you go back into your life, whatever that looks like, it's going to feel different because you're different.
Absolutely.
And everything else initially may feel the same, but it feels old. It feels like you need to update the version of your environment. So I think to that point, having practices, having resourcefulness within our own being, having a life that creates an environment that allows for growth to happen, that allows for you to have community or close peers around you that have sacred agreements that allow you to breathe into your growth. All these things are super important. We often want to get these peak experiences, and again, although that might open the shutter, how do you live through that? The other piece of that is that the hard truth sometimes for us is, am I living the life that I'm walking into? Is it a supportive environment? Are my values really different than this environment that I live in, where it doesn't really allow for growth, where I have to feel like I have to keep shrinking back again and again and again? Not that we don't have our own responsibility to say, wait, meaning there's a vulnerability in saying, hey, these are some shifts and awarenesses. This is where I'm at now.
Mm-hmm.
I want to share this with you because you in my life, that is important to me. It's important for me to become more explicit with what changes. How does that land with you? Am I available to share that? And am I also available to feel the response? How are the people around us responding? We shouldn't be surprised that our environment feels initially like a pushback, because I also feel that when we come back from an event or a run, it doesn't matter, we feel different. People feel that in our life, and it can make them uncomfortable because maybe they're not on the track. Maybe that light lights up stuff that's hard for them about themselves.
Absolutely.
And it's in our own sovereignty. It's really up to each person to decide what they're willing to say yes to within themselves and within the connection with other people.
Absolutely. There was a piece that caught my attention, and it was about checking in with yourself and asking yourself, do you even agree with this cosmic download? For my example, my aha moment felt really dark. It felt shadowy. It felt, oh, there's this big negative thing that has now crossed my awareness. And I didn't want to make friends with that, but it was a truth. It was a very big truth in my life. This is not one of these moments where I accept.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I found was happening is I think because it came in so sharp and so crisp that I automatically went, that's truth. Now what do I do about it? And I went into the action of it. But if I could have asked myself, and it made me think of like Katie Byron's 4 questions, if I could have just sat with myself and said, okay, is that true? Is what you just experienced true for you? And really sat with that. And what would it mean if it is true? And what if it means if it's not true? And how do you feel when it is and when it's not true? I could have done that piece. And what really ruffled the feathers in my space is that I had this come in and I was really disoriented about it. I was not in my truth about it. There was fear. There was, oh God, if this is true, what does this mean? Like, what do I have to do about it? It felt scary. It felt like I needed to hide and process, because do you even share it with people if it's not what it really is? There's all these things that came up. What we know to be true is that checking in with ourselves, getting right with ourselves, doing the embodiment stuff, taking the deep breath, giving the time and the space, and just look at the space. The bridge is there. And there was that kind of moment.
It's like something landed. It felt dark. It felt hard to digest. So you were getting all untethered of like, whoa, what's happening? But the identity of who you are, and please tell me if I'm off on this. It's really a question. The identity was trying to be like, oh, this is what I do with this. So I want to take action. That maybe you were questioning that part.
So what I feel happened was not new. I received a perspective from someone else, a third party perspective, and it was not new information. It was information that I've probably said before, but it was the way it was presented. It hit this deep groove in me of like, oh, I don't think I've ever really believed that that was true. I consciously could say, sure, there's breadcrumbs to this. This all makes sense. There was this kind of aha, caught me off guard, oh shit moment about another person that directly impacts me. And then because of what it was kind of like, oh, this is unchangeable. Even though it was a beautiful, aha, liberating moment. Finally, this makes sense. Confirmation. What I've felt and known to be true is hitting in my soul as true. And then I went, oh shit, what do you do with that truth? I felt like the blinders that I had on of how maybe I escaped the impact of this were lifted. The truth hit me in this way of going, maybe it's too true for this moment. Like it's too big of a truth to handle. So now to go back into life, like we were saying, and I feel like it parallels with, it can still be that beautiful, blissful retreat moment. This is something that hit, it felt more on the shadowy side. Like it wasn't the gift I really wanted to receive. Like to give this back for this never to be in humanity.
Right.
I tried to bounce back into my life so quickly without really acknowledging that something big had come into my field and would change the way I view the world and how I interact with people. I just tried to mentally process this while still walking the walk, and it was such a disservice. Looking back on it now, I want to be able to say, can you take some time to yourself and process this, integrate this, like you said, before you feel like you have to do anything? Because in that moment, when it hits you and you feel like you got to do something, you start doing things favoring something that may not be your truth, right? You may have just like taken the deeper dive and just said, this is your expectation. This is how you show up. This is how you respond, blah, 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 blah. Versus if I could just be with myself, the deeper truth may not have me take any action at all. I have to have this new relationship with this bigger moment before I decide to impact anybody else with my new truth, really. Like, how do I interact with my life when I'm in this place? And it doesn't feel like a lost place. It feels like a transformative place, but sometimes it's just not covered in rainbows the way maybe I think it should be. And I'm comparing it to I love those moments where I feel like I've seen God or had this aha, your life is going to be better now. I'm like, really?
When we have breakthrough moments or things that just start to transcend something within us,
Mm-hmm.
that how do we integrate into our life? Because there's real change happening. Like I mentioned my mom earlier. She went through some pretty powerful transformative processes in her neurology with the work that she did and received. And some of it was literally like her blood levels completely shifted. So, on a very physical, functional level, and she was cancering at the time, and perception changes. All of a sudden, she was experiencing light where she hadn't. So there was many different changes, but there was so big that it was in this case, this particular example, it was so far out of her culture in which that she normally lives. So, AKA coming back home to my dad at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being on the phone with her and her saying, like, I don't know what to do. Like the shutter opened big on all these levels, physically, emotionally, all of it, mentally
Mm-hmm.
and spiritually for her. And it is such a big change and gap between how I lived before this moment that I don't know. And she was well into her late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Was married to my dad at that point for about 50 years. I don't know what to do here because if this,
Yeah.
in this particular case, it was so different. He wasn't on that trajectory.
Right.
So it became such a split thing. And I remember thinking, wow, I am personally passionate about that lifestyle integration piece of what do you value and what are some of the things that you do in your life every day that allow this not to be such a big gap like I experienced in my mom, because I almost, part of me felt guilty to be part of opening up the world for her so much,
Mm-hmm.
but not having a damn strategy of how to integrate that back into her world.
That's right.
And who am I to say what her journey should be or should not have been?
Right.
And there was a reality that I felt of curiosity and wanting to highlight more of how do we hold the light there of what are those things that happen after the wedding? What are the things that happen after the event? What are the things that happen after the breakthrough? There's going to be sometimes pushback. Some people, depending on who we have in our life, and that's a really good sign. If we're having pushback by people in our world that are like, hey, we don't really like you all big and bright or
Mm-hmm.
this way, which I think part of that happened with my mom and my dad. It threatened my dad greatly. And my mom didn't have a strategy enough because this was just such a huge experience for her, but it's not how she was living her life.
Mm-hmm.
So it reminds me of what you said. Well, then I go back to living how I was, but that becomes a pain spot, right? Because now you're trying to devolve. It's like once you've seen it, you
You
go,
can't
fuck, I can't
unsee it.
unsee
Oh,
it.
so true.
I think my question is for people listening, what are some of the experiences that you go through when you're trying to fit into your life, but you don't want to fit into the old life? I will say that version of me 23 years ago that was like, hey, we're all friends and oh, I forgive you. I certainly don't do it that way anymore.
Yeah.
Because in that moment, when I forgave my ex husband and I hugged his new girlfriend, it was just such a misread. It's not that I was misreading what I was experiencing within myself that was changing, but I kind of exploded that out into assuming that everyone else now is feeling the way I'm feeling. So that was the baby skin that I had of, wow, I'm having all these awarenesses. It's amazing. And who am I to assume that people around me are on that same page? So I think that when I said change of an agreement, it's like my mom went back into the world with my dad and she was completely just by her experience of how different she was. That was a change. We've talked about the unsaid agreements. That was a change in the agreement of their dynamic
Yeah.
than when before she left. So in a way, it's a break of an agreement, And how can we take that and not shut down the breakthroughs that we have, but actually be able to nurture ourselves and nurture our environment to give our environment a chance to catch up. And with that, it gives us the information of what people are important to have around and what people maybe may cycle out of our life.
Yeah. I used to look at transformation as going, if I'm transforming, so should everyone else. If you want anything to change, the only thing that you can change is yourself. And that comment used to like piss me off because I was like, no, the other person needs to change. We need to change. This is a group effort. I have learned to have a new relationship and a newfound respect for that statement. Because when I do change, because of these moments, that does impact my world and the world around me in a very profound way. And even though it's going to be, it can be messy, like that's okay. Having the patience and the grace with those places. Like we're riding the bike for the first time and we're going to fall off. We might need training wheels. It's going to be this stumbly turbulence, whatever's happening. And that is okay. That it's not meant to be a mastered skill yet. You have just changed something about yourself, and then it will change the environment that you're in.
Yeah. Can you receive change within yourself? And if we truly accept that, we're less in our ego about, hey, now I'm better than, so everyone else has to change with me. Because there's very much a personality piece of that, an ego part that's like a non-acceptance of people around us. That's why this is an important conversation, because you want to be able to acknowledge that there's an energy that may feel like an initial mismatch, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that the people around you are wrong or less than or less evolved than. What it does mean is that we can acknowledge that it's going to feel different at first. If I do that, it's my own discomfort of growing into what I'm growing into, because I want to change everybody so I feel comfortable. If I can just be with who I am and the changes that I'm making, I don't have to change anybody. I can choose who I hang out with. But I think that we try to, it's like having somebody cry and we immediately go to them and we go, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Are we consoling them, or are we just trying to make ourselves comfortable because we feel uncomfortable that they're crying? So I think it goes both ways. If you do have people in your life like that, I would question, if people don't want to see you grow and celebrate that, that's a very important thing to look at. And I'd also look at, when you do grow, that is it a better than thing? If I'm trying to change people, I don't know that I'm doing the same thing. I'm saying you're not enough as you are, and I need to rah-rah you to some space that makes you as good as I am.
Yeah. What if it's not a match? How important is it for your life to match your upgrade, or do you default back into
showing me what I need to see.
Well, it's like the transcend and include, right? So when we transcend, we don't throw away our whole life that we were before. We take with us the threads that are the ones that we feel are truest of our nature. And so I think it's the same thing with our environment. We transcend and include. We don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. I also want to recognize that we're all very different in our habits, and that I think it's about having the ingredients in your life that can support the solo moments of quiet, of connection, the integrated moments with othering, with relating with people. And then there's your regular life, your community, your family. Those all need to be looked at and considered when you're making shifts. You can't just throw up all over people and be like, okay, this is me now. This is my truth. So if you love me, then you listen to my truth. Well, I can hear what you're saying. I think there is something called grace. And I think the grace is grace with ourselves, grace with the people we love, grace with the community. I think that transcending and including, we bring ourselves with us. We don't just all of a sudden become something else completely. We're a flower that's constantly budding, and then our leaves fall off, and this is the journey.
I like that.
And now, Trevor Hall with Blue Sky Mind.